Oh my goodness. Today's guest is an actor, Broadway star, activist, and musician who rose to fame as the first out trans contestant on RuPaul's Drag Race Season 9 in 2018. She made history as the first trans woman to originate a principal role on Broadway in the hit show Head Over Heels. You've seen her on shows like Pose, Harlem, Hulu's Fire Island, and Netflix Survival of the Thickest. In 2024, she became the first trans woman to compete in the Emmy Award winning hit series The Traitors
My
on
favorite.
Peacock. She's an activist who serves as the ACLU's first artist ambassador for trans justice and is a GLAAD Media Award nominee, as well as one of Out Magazine's Out 100. Please welcome our girl Peppermint. Hey, Peppermint.
What's up,
Oh my
girl?
God! What an intro. I can't.
I mean, you deserve it, honey. How have you been?
Girl, I've been wonderful. I've been great. I'm happy. Yeah, things are great. Well, I mean, all things considered, there's a lot going on in the world, but I'm great.
What have you been working on?
Well, I just finished filming season 2 of Survival of the Thickest like 2 weeks
Nice.
ago.
Yes.
I
I
am
love
so
that.
stoked. There is going to be, it's too early to talk about it because it's going to come out next year, but I'm really excited.
I'm so proud of you guys.
Thank you. They wrote some really as if they knew that there was going to be so much that our community, the LGBTQ plus community, had to deal with, and Michelle, Michelle, she's a real ally, and
Amazing.
so she's like, you know what, let's give them something good in season 2.
Michelle Boutier deserves it. The whole cast is so good. And I just love it. I love everything about Survival of the Thickest. But we're going to get into you and this grown ass topic. For today's grown ass topic is transitioning after 30. On this show, we often talk about finding yourself and living your truth. But what if your true self is different from your body that you were born into? Thanks to increased representation and acceptance of transgender communities in everyday life, more people are choosing gender affirming care after 30 and beyond. Now, despite the political challenges and media noise, we're here to remind you that figuring yourself out takes time and it's never too late to embrace what's best for you. Peppermint, this topic hits close to home. Tell us your journey with transitioning after 30 years old.
Well, I mean, I gotta say, I've always known that I was trans from a very early age. I just felt it. Let me just put it this way. I am who I am today, and I've always felt the same way. Always.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that it really changed is maybe some of the language that we had, to describe some of these things, which we didn't really
Mm-hmm.
have all those years ago. My family didn't really have the vocabulary. Even I don't think I even knew anybody who was trans. Certainly not that was out as trans. And so my entire childhood, young adulthood was really spent just kind of getting to know and getting comfortable with how I felt, because that's the only thing I could really like figure out.
Let's go back. I want to go back to when you were younger and when you said you knew you were always this way. What was it like and what was your family like when you were younger? Were they supportive? Were they questioning? And how did you handle that?
Well, there really wasn't. I think today, if someone sees a young a young person, an adolescent, or anybody for that matter, I even think people who aren't in the LGBTQ community might be able to like see somebody and say, maybe they're gonna be trans or maybe they're gonna be gay, like one of those two things, and see a difference between the two. But back then, I think people just saw me and they were like, "Oh, this child is swishy." Like that's that's all they had to describe.
Right.
I was teased a lot by other kids, and all the other kids were like, "Oh, you Miss Thing." Like that's what they were telling me. And I went through different
Right.
phases of trying to hide that. Not so much that I didn't want to be Miss Thing, because I always did, but
Mm,
I didn't want to be teased for being Miss Thing. And so, like, when
of
we had
course.
to be in gym class or whatever at school, I would try to do different things to, like, not stand out. And they would beat me up because of that. So they were communicating. They knew before I could articulate that I was who I am now.
Did you have support from your family?
Yeah, listen, my family was liberal. Ain't nobody voting for Trump in my family. And so they were always like accepting. I think the word that we were using in the 90s was like just tolerant, you know? They were tolerant. um, there was moments with individuals in my family where they would say a certain thing or act a certain way that let me know I can't go too far. But I was allowed to do, look, I wasn't trying to be in sports. They would have not had me in the sports team, and I wasn't trying to join the
Right.
sports team. So luckily there was a choir club, there was drama class, and my family was really supportive of that. So I guess they were like, as long as there was something from somewhere for me to put this swishy energy, then they could go
Got it.
along with it. So they were like, oh, they're just artistic.
Do you think? I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'm not going to ask your age because we don't do that on this show. But I know for our certain generation, they didn't have the tools, or we didn't have the tools to know what that meant. Kind of like you were saying. Now I think things have changed where we have the words to identify, or at least are open to seeing. Oh, okay, that's a different thing. We have categories now that we weren't aware of back then.
Oh, absolutely. I think had I grown up in today's world, then I probably would have identified as queer and non-binary at one point, and then then trans.
Right.
And so back then, I was like, okay, well, I'll stand over here with the gays, but I'm not gay.
Right.
But there ain't no other category, so I guess I'll stand over here.
Right. You didn't even have the word to use, right? You didn't even know
Right.
Yeah, that's
Didn't have the word.
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
But you knew that you were different, not having the vocabulary, not really understanding. Was that another reason why you transitioned later after 30?
I would say so. Although when I was in second grade, and trust me, it was second grade because I was speaking to a friend of mine named Gavin Downs. I've talked to him since then. He says I could use his name. He was a transfer. He was from Ireland. He didn't grow up in America, so he just didn't have the same prejudices that the other American kids had. So he just seemed like, I don't care who it is. I'm new. Anybody that's nice to me, I'll be nice to. That's what it seemed like he was putting out. And so we were on the playground one day, and we had talked a few times before, and I just remember saying to him, you know what? Let me tell you something about me. I'm different. And I was like trying to articulate it, but I eventually ended up at that. And he was like, I understand. And we were in second grade. I guess we were like, what, 8 or 9? Then later on, I was able to, probably around 16, 17, 18, I eventually came to the realization that I'm trans and that, everything about me is a womanly vibe. I can feel that in my veins. And I'm trans, but I'm trans and poor. I ain't got no
Right.
money. So and nothing I can do
Right.
about it. So I was like, well, let me get into the world of drag. Let me do my makeup and hair and feel fabulous because,
Right.
And that allowed me to get even closer to what I was feeling. It wasn't all the way, but it was closer.
Are we talking about the cost for health care to make the transition? Is that what we're talking about?
There was a few barriers. Once I knew I'm trans, the first thing was I can't tell anyone, and I'm not going to tell my family because I know that no one will understand.
Sure. Sure.
And I don't want to bring, I don't know, nobody told me this, but I had it in my mind. So I guess subconsciously I learned it. I don't want to bring shame to my family. So I'm going to wait until everyone is dead and then I'll come out. So that was the first thing I said. And so that got me to 16, 17, 18. And then I was like, well, I can't wait until everybody's dead. They might live a long time. So I need to be happy before they die. And so then the next thing was I really thought that I could just not do anything about the medical transition because I didn't have the money. I didn't have I didn't even know, even if I had $1 million, I wouldn't have known where to go. But most importantly, I also saw how the rest of the world was treating trans folks. Today we have Laverne Cox and all these wonderful people. That then I only had the Jerry Springer show. And the Jerry Springer show was bringing trans women on who were like professing their love for their partner, and then their partner
Right.
was like beating them upside the head with a chair. And then the
Horrible.
audience would
Right.
cheer that on. And I was like,
Yep.
well, I don't want that. So maybe I should just keep it a secret. So then eventually, the next thing that was a barrier was literally just the money and that not having the resources, not knowing where to go, and not having community. Once I had community and I met other trans girls who I became friends with and I was seeing their journey, then it was a lot easier for me. They would tell me, "Oh, I went this is what I did," or "This is how I was able to get through." And then the last piece was the mandate from our governor that said it's going to be free in New York. That was like a godsend for me. And I was like, oh, and it meant that I'd be able to afford the care that I needed. It meant that I'd be able to go to a doctor or a specialist, someone who had education and expertise on treating trans folks, because there was a moment in time where I was calling around to doctors. Once I made the decision that, okay, I'd like to medically transition, I was calling around to doctors trying to find if I could get some kind of health care. And the doctors' offices, they were like hanging up on me because they weren't even used to a trans person calling. They were like, oh, we don't know what that is. So back then you couldn't just go to any doctor. Like if you have the flu, you can go to any doctor. If you have a headache, you can go to any doctor. If you're trans, you should be able to go to any doctor. But back then, especially, this was more than 10 years ago, you had to go to someone, wasn't a specialist, but someone who had experience with the community and wasn't going to discriminate.
Well, it's so interesting because I actually grew up, and this is, again, I'm not going to give you my age either, but I had a very good friend who I grew up with who was a trans male. And at the time, I'll never forget, I mean, we were kids, probably earlier than second grade, and she at the time, now he, would play with my brother and my brother's friends. And so me and my girlfriends would be like, hey, why aren't you playing with us? You know what I mean? Like, why are you playing with the boys? And she's like, I'm not a girl. We were probably 6 and 7, little kids. And that early on, and his family is actually a very prominent family he would think would be a lot more accepting because they're a Hollywood family. But it took, his high-profile family to accept that because at that time, again, it was a different time, but we didn't have the words. We didn't have the knowledge of what that meant. Now I have godchildren who are in their 20s who are like, I don't know if I'm gay or straight. I'm just going to figure it out. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's so normal now. And we've come such a long way.
I mean, we've come a long way, but we're still not, especially in the African American community,
yes.
we're not accepting of it.
That's true.
And in your opinion, Peppermint, what do you think are some of the challenges and what can we do to help people kind of see the light?
Two things need to happen. I think number one is we need to have more visibility. And I think ultimately a well-respected, very masculine, heterosexual man is going to need to come out as being trans attracted without being caught or shamed or exposed. Just like saying, this is my woman, this is who I love, and that's it. And I don't care what the hell y'all think.
Mm-hmm.
I think that could help other men understand that we are not a threat. And it also could help other cis women understand that we're not a threat.
I didn't know that was an issue, especially in the Black community between cis Black women and Black trans women. But it's been brought to my attention that there is some kind of competition there.
It's new.
I didn't know about. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not new, but that's new. I really do
Right.
think since we're so much more visible than we were 10 years ago, people literally think we just got invented by Hollywood last year in April. And, that's obviously not true. One piece that is difficult for people to get around or difficult for people to sort through and they automatically shift to when we're talking about gender and transness is sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
People are instantly, automatically interested in genitalia and sexuality. And I remember it doesn't happen so much anymore because I think we've been able to get people to see that we are actual human beings with whole lives. But people were instantly interested in, so who does that mean you sleep with? And what does that mean for the people that you're sleeping with? Did you tell them? Did you trick them? You probably tricked them. And so like that goes down that lane. And, there's other really prominent trans women. T.S. Madison is my favorite. She talks about her history, and she talks about this openly as a sex worker, as a former sex worker. And so her sexuality and her sexual experiences are something that she talks about openly for people. And so they get to have an understanding of what type of partners she's had. And it's usually, I think it's always been, at least for what she says, heterosexual men. I am, the men that are interested in me are not interested in other men. And that is something that I can understand very easily. And that the men who are attracted to me and who speak with me and everything, that they understand very easily. Their history, their dating history, their sexual history is usually just like either trans women or cis women, but it's just women.
Yeah.
You taking a competition. This is another reason why some people don't have a man.
A black man. A black
That's
man
what they say.
specifically.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
But guess what? Listen, girl. I'm sorry. There are plenty of men that are running around and acting a fool. That has nothing to do with trans women, because if it wasn't trans women, some of these guys are running around. They're just running around with everybody,
right.
anybody that they can. And that's a
Right.
whole nother topic, that they're not
Absolutely.
treating us properly. I think that has something to do more with how men or masculine people treat women and feminine people. And I'm saying that way because many of these men that I've spoken with have expressed, when I try to get them, because I'm really interested, I try to get them to explain about, like, so what is it that you see in me? What is it? How would you describe yourself? Are you gay? Are you not? And they're like, no, I'm only into women. And then when I try to get them to go further, they'll explain that they are attracted to feminine energy and anything that's female and feminine energy, like womanly, like that's the vibe. And they've told me, the ones who are attracted to me and some of the girls that I've talked to, they say that the genitalia has less to do with their attraction. When you see somebody walking down the street, you don't see their genitalia. I don't think you see their genitalia.
Right.
You can see their vibe more than you can see their genitalia when they're just walking on the street or somebody that you meet. And so that's what they're attracted to. And for a lot of men, they see how I walk down the street, how I look and how I present myself more in line with the other women that they're also attracted to than they do with some guy, some football player. And it's so funny because those same types of people who might now say, oh, trans woman isn't a woman, you're a man, you're this. They were the very first people chasing me around the block, chasing me and girls like me around the block to tell me that I was a girl when I was 6, when I was 7. They'd beat you up and say you're a woman.
And now you become yourself, and now they mad.
They can't take it, darling.
This is what I want to know. What is your view about when you're dating, if you should even tell that you're trans?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I'll acknowledge I have been on a TV show, so maybe that certainly changes how I approach dating or even just meeting anybody at all. But even before that, for a while I had to ask myself the question of, will I look like other women? Will I sound like other women? Will my hands be the same size? Will I pass? All these little signs and signals that people use to see if you're trans, if you're not, if you're born this, that. I used to feel really self-conscious about. Some of those things, obviously, I was able to, address medically or hormonally, whatever. And some of those things I obviously can't change or haven't or don't want to or whatever. And at some point it was too late. There's a whole list of things that people would say, people who are not trans would have told you, especially in the 80s and 90s, that they know. They would say out of their mouth, I would never say this, but they would say out of their mouth, oh, I know she's a man. That's what they would say about a trans woman. They feel like they can detect any trans woman, and their list would be, look at her feet. Look at her hands. Look for an Adam's apple. Listen to her voice. All those things go out the window when someone transitions around the same age as puberty or as a young adult. When you transition later, all those things are already come in. And unfortunately, for me, the testosterone did make a mark on my body and throughout my from puberty through young adulthood, and it made my body develop in ways that I can't reverse. Kind of like if you're like 6 feet tall, you can't like get shorter.
Right.
You
You
know,
can get sure. Right.
so there's certain things you just can't do. There's certain things you can, but many things you can't. And so because of that, I always just said, well, I'll never be passable. I'll always be read as someone who's what people would say is not a woman. I convinced myself of that. So the downside to that is I had low self-esteem for a long time. The upside to that is I just had said, well, look, I'm going to make it work. And I feel like whatever it is, it looks good, even if it is 6 feet tall. And then I was able to say, okay, I'm going to lead. And with the fact that I'm trans, I assume that people know that I'm trans because I think it's obvious, but I have it like on a dating profile. I have it out there. And I just like to talk about it because I think it will help our community and it'll help other people get used to having that conversation. Because what used to happen is we were around and the same amount of people were dealing with us 30 years ago that are dealing with us today, but they just weren't talking about it.
Right.
Yeah. Real quick, last question. What advice would you give to someone who's considering transitioning later in life?
Find community, number one. Number two is there's no rush. You can transition on your last dying day. Okay, that might be a little late, but
In your time.
in your own time, there's no rush, there's no race, and guess what? No human being stops changing or evolving in some way. Everyone evolves, they learn new things. Hopefully you learn new things about yourself. And so everyone does that, including trans people. And then the third thing is do it. Just do it. People, you will be okay. Everyone, people who love you will continue to support you. And the people who have conditions on their love, they may or may not, or it may take time for them to come around, but just do it.
I love that. And on that note, Peppermint, thank you so much for joining us today. You were a pleasure and a joy to
And
talk to.
gorgeous.
Lovely. And for our listeners, be sure to check out Survival of the Thickets on Netflix. And when we come back, we're going to get into the takeaway with Loni. This is Grown Ass Women Talking.
Okay, now it's time for my second favorite segments of the show, which is about Loni. Loni, what did we learn today?
Well, we learned that you just understood something about a rumor about cis Black women and trans women.
No, it was brought to my attention. It's not a rumor. It was brought to my attention that there's a thing right now because evidently people think there's a small pool of eligible Black men. And so Black cis women, straight women, are fighting with, Black trans women to get their men. And I just say, let's squash that beef right now. Like, it's not our fault. It's not the trans women's fault. It's the men's fault. So, I just say
everything is about the men.
Yeah,
so.
It's all the men's fault.
What I loved about Peppermint, first of all, was her transparency. I think that she made some really good points about how we have modernized medicine. So now, even if you transition later, it's a lot easier. You still need to have a community around you if you decide to do that. I also think that you need to have the health care. You need to study and research and make sure that you have the proper facilities and doctors that can help you.
Vote, so we can keep all that.
Exactly. So I just think that it's a topic that we'll continue to explore because we need to have tolerance. We need to have understanding. And like she says, trans people have been here. That's just simple, and they're not going anywhere.
I have a who might have been trans, but then he just didn't have the money probably. I don't know.
Any final words, Erica?
Yes. Sorry you didn't have the funds to live your life, but it is what it is. Now we're in a better place. And Loni? I love
Well,
you.
that's it. I love you too. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Grown Ass Women Talking. Please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram or YouTube at GAWT Pod. Come see me October 27th at the Chicago Women's Expo. I'll be at Stand Up Live in Phoenix on November the 10th or at the Miami Improv on December 15th. Tickets on sale now. My book, I Tried to Change So You Don't Have to, is now available on Amazon. Check the show notes for the details. Thanks again to Peppermint for joining us. Check out Survival of the Thickest on Netflix. Erica, she's working, so y'all don't worry. She got plenty. I got to HARQ everything I do. Erica, I'll see you later.
Bye. Love to everyone.